Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear us and see us well. Thank you for being here today, and welcome to this third webinar, Zero Debris webinar. So over the last year, at the Zero Debris Future Symposium of the last Zero Debris Week, but also in many other occasions, questions have been raised on zero debris related regulations and policies. Indeed, clear and coherent requirements, policies, and regulations are essential to achieving our collective ambition to reach zero debris targets by 2030. But these policies, these regulations, are not always easy to understand or navigate. That's why we decided to organize this webinar today to provide a quick overview of ESA ON's space debris requirements and policy, but also to provide you with a quick worldwide perspective on what exists and what are the emerging trends. So I will first give the floor to Quentin Versteren at my right for an introduction. Then we will move on to Sibyl from ESA to present you ESA's space debris requirements and policy, and then to Alberto from ESPI for this worldwide perspective. We will have some time at the end for questions. So please do not hesitate to put all the questions you may have during the presentations in the Q&A section dedicated for that. You can post your questions, but you can also vote. So if you see a question that you think is particularly interesting, don't hesitate to vote for it so as it goes up, and we will make sure that all the questions that are deemed more important or interesting are being answered during this 20-25 minutes of Q&A at the end. Okay, so now I will give the floor to Quentin, the head of the Space Safety Program Coordination Office, for the introduction.
Thank you very much, Sasha, for the introduction and for organizing this workshop. Hello, everyone. It's very nice to see so many of you connecting now. The number keeps growing. So this webinar is the first of 2026, and it comes after a very strong year for space safety and sustainability in 2025. You may have heard that already quite a lot, but for us at ESA specifically, the last ministerial conference was a strong success overall, but especially for the space safety program, which has demonstrated a very strong interest and support of the member states to accelerate our efforts on debris mitigation, debris remediation, and every subject connected to space safety and sustainability. A lot of our missions that we were proposing to the member states, I'm thinking about RISE, CAT, ERASE, the evolution of LEO platforms, all of this is being funded and secured to really make sure that we are going towards zero debris by 2030. The Zero Debris Charter and the Zero Debris Community followed the same momentum. The number of signatories to the Charter has continued to grow without weakening and has reached now 216 signatories. So that's plus 50% in 2025. And this engagement keeps getting stronger. One of the highlights in particular is the signature of Spain. So Minister Diana Morant signed the Charter on behalf of the Spanish government on the 16th of October 2025. And as a first commitment to this signature, Spain, the Spanish Space Agency, will be hosting the Zero Debris Week in September 2026. So it will be the first time that the Zero Debris Week is not hosted by ESA, but by one of the partners, one of the signatories of the Charter. Another focus in 2025 was the strengthening of the technical implementation part in the Charters community, with the organizations of elections to structure the work related to the Zero Debris Technical Booklet, with the creation of technical working group, of a technical steering committee, and of a coordination group. And this has demonstrated, again in 2025, that there is, let's say, a thirst for autonomy and growth of the zero debris community, and that the community is organizing itself, is becoming more and more a coherent group that want to have an influence on technical, policy, commercial, regulatory developments. One other highlight, apart from the setting up of the technical working group, coordination group, etc., was the fact that we also had the first large-scale signature ceremony of the Zero Debris Charter that was not organized by ESA. The Institute of Space Studies of Catalonia organized at Space Tech Expo on the 19th of November its own signature ceremony, and managed to secure 17 new signatories. So these are typically what the Spanish Space Agency is doing, what the Institute of Space of Catalonia did, what the Estonian government did also last year in organizing signing ceremonies. These are initiatives that are really positive, and that I personally want to see more and more, seeing that every member of the community wants to, let's say, take a strong role in organizing an event, in starting an initiative, in promoting the charter, so that we are really in a collaborative effort, completely driven by the most motivated members of the community. So in 2026, we definitely need, and we see the appetite in the community to reinforce, let's say, coordination activities, collaboration activities related to the more policy, legal, and commercial dimensions of zero debris. So the technical booklet is really on its way. It's delivering. It continues to deliver. But there is a strong appetite, as I said, to reinforce this policy, legal, and commercial dimensions. And I think the fact that we have so many of you coming for this webinar is testament of this enthusiasm and this demand for policy. So you will hear from us. We are really trying to increase that side of the zero debris community. And I would also make a call that if you're an organization that, similarly as those who are leading technical activities with the booklet, want to step up and help the community organize itself around commercial, policy, or regulatory subjects, please come forward, and we'll make sure to connect all those who are motivated to play that role and to support them in developing initiatives for the benefit of the whole community. And finally, before giving the floor to the other speakers, I want to thank them. So thanks Sibyl and Alberto for sharing with us today very important knowledge on both ESA internal policies and rules, and providing us with an overview of what's happening around the world, because a lot of things are happening, a lot of things strongly relevant to zero debris, and it will be extremely valuable to have a clear picture and analysis on that from Alberto. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed this webinar.
Okay, thank you very much, Quentin, for this introduction. For those who joined us during this introduction, just to remind you that we will have a Q&A session at the end. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A section, and you can also vote for the questions that are being asked if you think the given question is interesting. And we try to answer all of them at the end of the webinar. So now we will move on to Sibyl for the presentation of ESA's Space Debris Mitigation Requirements and Policy. Thank you very much for being here today, and I will give you the floor.
Thanks, Sasha and Quentin, for the nice introduction. Can you hear me well? Yes.
Yes, very well.
Okay, let me share my screen. Please let me know if you see the presentation.
Not yet. Oh,
Yes.
perfect. Yes, we can now.
Okay, great. Okay, so hello everyone. Today I'll be presenting the zero debris policy and space debris mitigation requirements. I apologize in advance because this might be a quite a reminder more than any in-depth new information. So I'll try to go quickly through what is our internal policy at ESA for space debris mitigation, the roles, the structure, and potential evolution up to 2030. Okay, so this may be already presented many times in our different workshops and webinars, but just to remind everyone the current scope of the zero debris approach within ESA. We are trying to tackle space debris mitigation both internally and together with partners on the international scale. So internally, as I was mentioning, we have updated in 2023 the policy and the related technical requirements that go with it. This is under the ownership of the Space Independent Safety Office, which has the mandate to evaluate in an independent way the compliance to space debris mitigation requirements across ESA missions and projects. Along that, we also implemented, started already after the 2022 ministerial several technical developments within the agency, activities, studies to understand better how to bring zero debris by 2030, but also very critical technology developments, including, for example, demisable technologies, but also preparing removal services for the future. And then engaging with partners and building a community. I think that's exactly the goal also of this webinar. Sasha and Quentin already mentioned the Zero Debris Charter and the booklet, so I'll not enter into the details of that. So today's presentation is mostly focused on reminding what is the role, structure of the zero debris policy within ESA. Starting with the policy, this is a document that basically defines to whom the technical requirements apply within the agency. So it defines firstly the perimeter of applicability of the technical requirements. Compared to the previous policy that was applicable from 2014, this new document, new from 2023, makes space debris mitigation applicable to space systems under ESA contracts, but also to operations that are under ESA responsibility and any procurement of services, including launch services, for example. So these procurements and co-fundings now have to a certain extent show also compliance with some of the measures that we have in place for ESA missions. Another important point that this policy introduces is also the applicability on the timelines. So today, the policy is applicable to missions regardless of their phase, as the document is has been issued. The reason for that is that the technical requirements, and we will see in the future slides, also brought up many operational topics, so collision risk management, health monitoring, which are provisions that can be applied to missions that have already been launched or had been already going through the major reviews. So at the time of publishing the policy, we also decided, or the working group on the policy decided to make it applicable regardless of the phase of the mission. This document also introduced a new process for assessing waivers, deviations, in case there would be any anomaly that is detected during operations, which is basically assessed by this Space Debris Mitigation Assessment Board. And I'll explain a bit better what's the role of this board. So these are the main three areas of this policy. Now, in the year of from the moment that it has been published until now, we have been collecting lessons learned and also the compliance to our own ESA missions. And one of the important messages is that the number of independent reviews to project has increased a lot along the years, especially with the publication of this new policy on space debris mitigation. This can be explained, of course, because the number of missions and involvement of ESA has grown along the years, but also with this new zero debris approach, we significantly increased the awareness on these issues, both internally and externally, and therefore this made it possible to reach more projects and have more independent assessment and support their implementation of space debris mitigation. By reaching more and more projects and more missions, not only fully funded by ESA, but also services contracted by ESA, for example, we had, of course, to provide several clarifications on the applicability, to what extent the policy would be applied to different kinds of contracts. So this was an ongoing work in the last year as well. Another important milestone is so as I was mentioning, the policy was applicable to any mission regardless of their phase. As you can imagine, this received also quite some pushback because we cannot apply new requirements to missions that were already being prepared for integration to the launcher. So what has been done is also work on a stepped approach on the implementation of the technical requirements, depending on the phase in which the missions were when the policy was published. So the policy was published in 2023 in November. And basically, this means that for missions that had not passed SRR at that time, the policy, both on design and operations provisions, was fully applicable. But for missions and projects that were in later phases when the policy was published, we defined a stepped approach with adapted applicability. So, of course, the design requirements asking for update of the platform, for example, for end of life or for specific requirements for disposal, were made less applicable depending on the phase. So after PDR, for example, we were only asking for a statement of compliance, trying to understand where would be the most impacts and apply these provisions on a best effort approach. Any area where the policy was fully applicable had to be assessed through independent reviews. And if there was any deviations, this would go through a formal process that goes up to the approval of the Director General. In the next slide, I'll explain a bit more in detail how this process goes. But just as lessons learned, this implementation document was extremely useful to define the steps in which the policy would be made applicable, but also to create a clear picture of all the different projects that we had in the agency and how this policy would apply. So on the third main objective of this policy, introducing the Space Debris Mitigation Assessment Board, the main role, at least the one that has been seen the most in the last 2 years, is its role in assessing requests for deviations and waivers. So with these mechanisms, this board that is composed currently by the head of the Independent Safety Office and the head of the space safety program, together with some experts as well sitting in this board. The role is to assess these requests for deviations and to propose recommendations, either recommendations directly to the project to perform additional analysis or provide more justification as of why these deviations were needed, or to approve, let's say, these deviations. As you can see on the right-hand side of this slide, we have a specific process about this deviation or waiver requests and how these are treated. We usually request a presentation from the project. This is then assessed by the board, which provides technical recommendations. Then this is passed on to the Office of Implementation of the Director General, which provides recommendation on the programmatic considerations. So, for example, is the deviation acceptable or justified with respect to the schedule of the mission or the cost of the mission, etc. And then both these technical and programmatic recommendations are provided directly to the Director General for the final decision. Now, in the last 2 years, we have gone through this process a few times, mostly for missions that were not prepared to receive the policy and were already in stages that were too late to implement design changes to the satellites, but also in specific cases where some of the provisions of space debris mitigation were not feasible, considering the schedule, the cost, or even the contract specifically of these missions. This process has been shown to be very useful to ensure also that we transfer knowledge across different projects, because this board has also the role of collecting lessons learned. So each mission that comes forward to the board with issues or with waivers, the experts that are part of the board are collecting these lessons learned gaps and assessing them for future implementation in our missions. As I was saying, this board also gathers in some occasions in case of anomalies are detected during operations, but also in case there's a disposal that is planned or a mission extension that is planned. So we gather to collect the lessons learned on if the disposal has been performed in the nominal conditions, what are the lessons learned on that, and how can we benefit future projects with this information. So that's for the policy. Let's now go diving a bit deeper into the technical requirements. So the policy basically makes applicable specific technical requirements related to space debris mitigation. These requirements are gathered in an ESA internal standard, the ESSB STU 007. And in these documents, there are several provisions on specific topics, mainly on clearance criteria. So, for example, we ask spacecraft to deorbit within a certain time frame, but also with a certain collision probability threshold. We also have requirements on collision risk management and space traffic management. Mostly it's encoding the best practices that we have today on data sharing, on the order of priority in which maneuvers have to be performed, if the spacecraft needs to be equipped with propulsion or not, in which risk zones you are located, etc. Another important part and new part on the space debris mitigation requirements has been implementing or preparing future missions to be removed. So in case they would fail, to have the necessary interfaces to help basically an external services to remove them from orbit. And finally, another important topic that has been new also in this sense is extending the requirements to other orbits. So medium Earth orbits also have now some requirements, but also lunar orbits. So we have less requirements than for very crowded orbits, but still it's a starting point. So for lunar missions, there are several provisions that apply there. As a note, as you can see on the bottom left part of the slide, this is just a note that we have updated last year in October, the standard. It's just a new revision that has been published, trying to correct some of the typos and mistakes that were in the standards. So nothing new in terms of technical requirements, but trying to make it more implementable in missions. Okay, so on top of these technical areas that I described, disposal, operational requirements, the space debris mitigation framework has also implemented new instruments. So depending on the for example, the risk profile of the mission, the space debris mitigation requirements would be tailored. And this has not only been seen in the ESA standard, but also across other documents that were recently published and that go in the same direction. So, for example, we can mention the French law that was published in 2024 and the new draft of the EU space law. They all have similarities and different provisions for these different areas. And we can clearly see an evolution of the numerical values as well of the space debris mitigation requirements. So the 5 years, for example, in other standards, we saw that a proportional rule with respect to the mission lifetime was also taken for the French Space Act, for example. One point on that is so the tailoring based on the risk profile has been quite interesting in the case of ESA missions because of the variety and diversity of ESA projects. So the idea behind that was that requirements could not be applied in the same way to a CubeSat mission as it would be for a large geostationary spacecraft or a large Earth observation mission, for example, that was orbiting in very risky regions. So depending on the altitude, on the decay time, and also on the size, that would be correlated with the collision risk. Different levels of requirements apply, and that's what we can see in the graph on the left. As you can see, there are different zones. So the longer the spacecraft remains in orbit, the longer the more it poses a threat to the space environment, and therefore the stricter the requirements. And same on the satellite size. The bigger the satellite, the more risk it has of colliding with other objects, not only the trackable ones, but also untrackable ones. And therefore, the more provisions go. And this has been seen also in the last years when we were mapping and applying the requirements to our internal ESA missions. And that's the graph that you can see on the right-hand side. We can clearly see that there's a wide range of missions and risk profiles that are seen across ESA missions. So it has been very useful to have this tailoring based on the risk profile of the missions. So now I wanted to give a bit of a snapshot on how this is going. So this has already been shown because these are the numbers from 2024. So we have been collecting the level of compliance to our space debris mitigation requirements. And as you can see, the level of compliance across the different ESA missions for the year of 2024 had reached 59%. And this also involves missions that were already in later phases when the policy was published. So knowing this, we consider that this is already quite a good achievement. It can be noted that after 2030, so for missions that have a planned launch year after 2030, we reach 100% of compliance to the zero debris principles. Now, I don't have the numbers to show you for 2025 because we are currently processing these data, but I can say that we have already received much less requests for clarification and deviation for the requirements. So it is really going in the right direction, at least internally, and hopefully we will see that in the results that we have for 2025 and the level of compliance to the requirements. So some of the lessons learned from these last 2 years of applying the technical requirements, it has been very useful to already start the work before the policy was published. So this is what we intend to do also for future evolution of the requirements, to always prepare our missions to the most extent possible before applying more strict requirements. And also, we have seen a quite proactive attitude and response from small missions that were able to adapt very quickly to the new requirements, especially the 5-year rule. So this has been positive. Of course, the implementation of these new technical requirements also involved that there were some new analyses that were requested, new tools with the evolution of drama. So there has been a lot of exchanges with the community, with industry, with operators, and support that has been given by ESA through webinars or dedicated bilaterals for that reason. Surprisingly, another point that is important is that the casualty risk, so the risk of re-entering and having casualty on ground, in the last 2 years, we have seen that it's still one of the most challenging ones to apply. This is also goes with the fact that it's not a new requirement, but however, the models and the population on ground modeling has been evolving, and therefore it has been also a challenge to comply with the uncontrolled re-entry in some specific cases, while the technology developments are still being ongoing. So that's how it was going, but I guess that everyone wants to know what's next regarding the technical requirements. So in the last year and a half, we have been collecting, as I said, the feedback from missions, but also there were several studies and research and development activities that had started already in 2022, 2023, that now are being finalized or have already been finished. So the next step that we are trying to do now is to collect all the recommendations and the lessons learned that we have from these activities. And these are namely the zero debris platform studies. So we have been working with industry, with large system integrators, small system integrators, CubeSat providers, but also constellations providers to help evolve their platforms for more stringent 2030 principles for zero debris. And this has been extremely helpful in understanding also where are the limits for evolving the requirements and to provide recommendations and inform future policy evolution. Other activities also that can be mentioned are specific technology developments that we are also monitoring. So the idea is not to evolve specific requirements for example, health monitoring or prognostics, while these technical developments have not been yet finalized. And finally, we had some specific studies on the impact of evolving some of the thresholds that we have in our standard. For example, the 5-year threshold, but also thresholds of collision risk and vulnerability to debris impacts. So this is all ongoing work that we're now this year going to consolidate. Of course, I mentioned also the missions, And most importantly, the zero debris community is also a very important part that we'll take into account as well for evolving the requirements. And we have seen already quite some proactive exchanges during bilaterals, workshops, this webinar, for example, hopefully, and also the work that has been ongoing on the booklet. So all these activities will be considered for evolving the requirements. Now, to the question, when will the requirements evolve? So for sure, the policy and the standard on space debris mitigation will be updated by 2030. Unfortunately, I don't have a specific date to give for now because this is ongoing work. And because we're still collecting some of the lessons learned from implementing the 2023 policy to our missions. But for the process, this is an internal ESA process that is usually done through a dedicated working group where we collect feedback from each ESA directorate. So each directorate, Earth observation, telecommunication, etc., is represented in this working group and provides feedback to requirements evolution. And finally, this is reviewed independently by external reviewers. Now, having said that, this is an internal process, of course, all this will be informed by all these studies, technology developments, and zero debris community, as I was mentioning. I'll try to be quick because I see that I'm already a bit over time. Regarding the evolution or the areas of interest for the evolution of the requirements, again, I won't be able to give you any specific thresholds or requirements today because of time, but also because some of these thresholds are still being consolidated through the activities that I mentioned. But some of the areas encompass the probability of successful disposal and passivation. So currently we have a 90% success rate that we're asking our missions to comply with. It will probably evolve, or we are looking into what are the limits for this probability of successful disposal, both looking at impacts on space missions, but also what would be needed to guarantee a sustainable space environment. Some of the technical developments that we have are also looking further into prognostics for failure detection and prediction, which we believe is also a very important area to explore, especially for constellations and constellation missions. Another point that has been increasingly talked about in also previous webinars is the vulnerability to debris and micrometeoroid impacts. So how to protect our missions from untrackable debris, but also how to define a breakup. How do you prepare your spacecraft to be less vulnerable and more robust to these kind of impacts? On the operational side, we will be evolving also some of the requirements related to collision avoidance maneuvers, collision avoidance operations. We have several activities also on the looking at enhanced autonomy of these operations, but also improving the coordination and the range in which we can track space debris in orbit. Related to the disposal, there's two areas which are, let's say, at the core also of these 2030 evolution of requirements, which is the active debris removal and close proximity operations safety. As we see, there's a lot of interest in in-orbit servicing, but we have to ensure that these are done in a safe way. And finally, the two topics, dark and quiet skies and sustainability of the lunar environment. These were two seed requirements, let's say, in the current policy. There were only a couple of provisions for them, but it is in our intention to also gather the inputs of the community and to provide recommendations, further recommendations on how to mitigate those risks as well. Of course, the requirements evolution cannot go without evolving the tools that you are using to assess the compliance. So it's an ongoing work, but the guidelines and handbooks are being evolved. We recently published a handbook for space debris mitigation and verification guidelines. It was updated in September last year. So I encourage you to look at that. Also, continuing to update the tools that we have, such as Drama. We recently updated last year, in the last quarter, we updated Drama 4. 4.1 has been released, and this hopefully will help the community in assessing some of the new areas, such as trackability assessment, brightness analysis. It also includes improvements, for example, shape and attitude effects. And finally, the master database has also been updated recently in 2024 to have more recent population of space debris and space objects. So this hopefully gives a snapshot of what has been going on within the agency, and also what's the current framework, and how can you expect the evolution of the policy to go on in the coming years. Here is just a summary of the most important documents that I mentioned today. And if there's any issues or any questions related to how we apply space debris mitigation for ESA missions in particular, please don't hesitate to contact us with using this email. So thank you very much. I hope I was not too long, and I can take some questions after that.
Thank you very much, Asbin. It was very clear for the presentation. We have received a few questions, but as explained before, we will answer them at the end of the webinar. There will be a dedicated time for this. So yeah, again, for those who joined us like in the meantime, if you have questions, please write them down in the Q&A section. Now I will invite Alberto to come make his presentation. So Alberto is a fellow researcher at the European Space Policy Institute, and he will make this presentation on a more worldwide perspective on space safety, space debris mitigation requirements and policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Can you see my presentation? I think. No, that is civils. I think, wait, I'll try to reshare it again.
Perhaps, yeah, perfect.
Yeah. Can you see it now? I think, Sasha, you have to click some button in there.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yes. So, well, thank you very much. Thank you, Sasha. Thank you, Kantan, and of course the full team for organizing this webinar, which is rather important, seeing also the developments that we are seeing lately, not only from ESA side. Already, Sibyl gave us a very interesting and technical presentation. I will try to shift the focus more towards the policy and legal side. And I would also like to take you through what I believe is one of the most important regulatory transformation currently happening, which is the shift from soft law frameworks to increasingly binding enforceable obligations in space debris mitigation. For decades, space debris mitigation was governed by guidelines. We all know the IATC, we know the LTS guidelines also happening in COPUS, ISO standards, industry best practices, etc. And this created consensus, but they did not create a uniform enforcement. So what we are witnessing now, particularly in Europe, but also in the US, is the gradual hardening, let's say, of those norms into regulatory requirements. So for those not coming from a legal background, soft law, we mean non-legally binding requirements. Hard law, we mean legally binding requirements. So in the presentation, what I will try to explore is the evolution of these debris mitigation standards that Sibyl already pointed out. The EU Space Act and this Europe's emerging zero debris framework, which I'm sure many of you are wondering, and also the parallel developments in the US. So we, by the way, together with Kansan and Protect Accelerator at ESPI, created this. We worked on this study that you can find online. If you are interested, is on the comparison. It's a comparison and contrast of space debris mitigation standards, and we include also the zero debris charter. In this study, we saw that over the past 5 years, debris mitigation instruments have become more stringent and especially more numerical. Historically, the US orbital debris mitigation standards and practices, so the ODMSP, developed in 2003 and updated in 2019, I believe, and function as a kind of let's call it gold standard, right? These were heavily based on modeling from NASA's Orbital Debris Program Office, and were widely used not only domestically, but also internationally. So for example, as we mentioned before, the 25-year post-mission disposal rule, casualty risk thresholds, explosion prevention standards, these were deeply influenced by the US framework. But today we are seeing something different, right? We see that the traditional 25-year rule is increasingly replaced by the 5-year disposal requirement. We also see that post-mission disposal success probabilities are expected to reach 95%. And in Europe, especially by under the zero debris charter, by even 99%. We also see probability of debris generation is targeted at less than 1 in 1,000 per object per orbital lifetime, and so on and so on. We also see that access to SSA data down to 5 centimeter in LEO and 20 centimeter in GEO is now part of the performance expectation. So it reflects a growing recognition that voluntary guidelines are insufficient in an environment of I don't know how many exactly, but over 1,000 satellites today, and potentially 50,000, within the next few years. So, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, what I would like to do is present what's more or less happening in the US, and I see US colleagues also in this webinar attending. Then I would like to also give a more presentation on what the EU Space Act is or will achieve for this objective of zero debris, and especially what I would like to do is to explain or to shed some light on the legislative process of the EU, so that external partners, from abroad Europe, get to comprehend or to understand how to navigate in a big complicated governance. So turning to the US, the US trajectory is essential for understanding global convergence and divergence, right? The US orbital debris mitigation standard practices bind governmental entities through agency policy. However, NASA and the DoD are not regulatory agencies. They just implement debris mitigation primarily through procurement and contract mechanisms. So NASA, for example, requires companies to submit a detailed orbital debris assessment report that includes program management overview, spacecraft design description, debris release assessment, explosion potential assessment, et cetera, et cetera. And this is quite comprehensive, but there are important caveats. So as I said, NASA and the DoD may also grant waivers from the ODMSSP compliance. And indeed, public NASA waivers, they have been granted for the 25-year rule, for human casualty risk threshold, or even for risk of accidental explosions. So now some studies suggest that waivers were granted for significant portion of DoD launches between 2011 and 2018. So even with this, as I said before, gold standard flexibility or let's call it political pragmatism has been present, right? So for commercial operators now, regulations operate a bit different. In this case, the Federal Communications Commission, so the FCC, effectively imposes debris mitigation requirements through spectrum licensing. In 2020, the FCC went even further than the ODMSP and required commercial operators to dispose of a spacecraft, with a 5-year of end of life, and this is when we see the famous, FCC fine to Dish for not complying with this, and this was controversial because, operators argued that the FCC lacked rigorous technical modeling capacity and may have caused unintended orbital congestion in naturally decaying bands. And here we see in the US this like structural tension, right? We have on one side NASA and DoD, possess modeling expertise but are not regulators, and on the other side, the FCC is a regulator but relies heavily on an applicant-provided modeling. So there is currently debates within the US government about moving toward more risk-based approach. So future standards may incorporate constellation size, orbital altitude, propulsive capability, and so on and so on. And in addition, and this is important to mention, that the Office of Space Commerce is developing tracks, and that I'm sure you've heard about. So this like traffic coordination system for space, which aims to provide SSA data and coordination services to civil and commercial operators. Importantly, the US position emphasizes space traffic coordination, not space traffic management. So to remind everyone, coordination informs operators and management prescribes behavior. So the UN remains cautious about prescriptive regulatory STM systems. So this model that we see that is evolving, right? But it remains fragmented, agency-based, and politically debated. So now, turning back to Europe, and I want to also increase the speed so that we have time for the Q&A. The momentum behind space safety is really politically visible. We have
Alberto, sorry.
Yes.
Just to make sure, are you still on the context slide, or it's just that the slides have not been moving? We are starting to doubt.
They have it. Yes. Yeah. Sorry. Now, perfect. Yeah. So there was no slide on the US, so now to this, to the context. Yeah.
Just wanted to make sure that this works. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. So yeah, basically on the slides, what I wanted to do is have a bit of information that you can also read while I speak. So as I was saying, turning back to Europe, Kantan mentioned this at the beginning. Also, Sibyl, it's important to see the messages, that they were sent at the ESA, the Ministerial Council in November last year, and especially to see how ESA's space safety program was oversubscribed. So I think that the increase was like over 30%, if you can correct me now, Kantan, but I think it was like over 30% increase compared to the CM22. So multiple states explicitly highlighted space safety as a priority. And across national strategies, we see like 22 out of the 27 is a member or associate states recognize investment in space safety as necessary. 21 focus specifically on SSA and STM services. 15 are members of the USSD. Some countries also outside of the USSD express interest in joining, like Australia, for example. Belgium and Luxembourg, which are not USSD members, aim to develop national SSA capabilities. So we see also that national legislation has evolved. A large majority of ESA member states now incorporate debris mitigation requirements into national space laws, including France, as Sibyl mentioned, but also Germany, Italy, the UK, Finland, Denmark, Portugal, and others, right? And especially Denmark, I think, because of the Danish presidency of the EU Council, noted that the EU Space Act is a priority in shaping its legal framework. So, in other words, member states are legislating, but they are also waiting, and they anticipate this harmonization through the EU Space Act. Now, before I go further, I think we need to address a fundamental question that I would like to. I see so many or some space lawyers or European space lawyers in the webinar. So I would be happy also to, if they could contribute or in the chat or maybe even ask some questions. But I think it's important, as I was saying before in the presentation, to try to address this also from like the more basic EU law perspective. So on what legal basis can the EU legislate in space? And this is the fundamental question. So under EU law, the Union can only act within competencies conferred upon it by the treaties, right? The treaty of the functioning of the European Union. So this is what is called the principle of conferral, which is set out in Article 5 of the Treaty on the European Union. So unlike a state, the EU does not have general competence, right? If the treaties do not grant it power, it cannot legislate. Now, space was explicitly introduced by the treaties, by the Lisbon Treaty in 2009, in Article 4.3 and Article 189, which give the Union competence in space. But, and this is what I think is crucial, that competence is a parallel competence. So it allows the EU to promote coordination and implement programs, but it explicitly exclude the harmonization of member states' laws. This, we can see it in Article 189, I repeat. And debris mitigation regulation is by nature harmonizing licensing condition, right? So how can the EU adopt binding harmonized framework? Well, the answer is a bit strategic, and we've seen comments already from Germany in this sense, that the EU Act is not based on the competence in Article 189, but it is based on Article 114, which is the article that establishes the internal market harmonization clause. So Article 114 allows the EU to adopt measures necessary for the establishment and functioning of the internal market. So instead of regulating space as such, the Act regulates market access, it regulates licensing conditions, it regulates risk management obligations, and competitive equality across member states. So in other words, debris mitigation is framed not as space, but as an internal market issue. And constitutionally, this is significant. Now, what exactly is the EU Space Act, right? We've listened, people talking about it, we call it ACT. We don't really know what ACT means, right? But ACT is only a political label in a way. It's just a name. Legally, it will be a regulation. And this matters a lot because under, Article 288, the EU can adopt either regulations or directives. So a directive really binds member states as to the result, but leaves them freedom in how to implement it. It requires national transposition. So a directive focuses on the result, but none on the way they actually do it. A regulation, by contrast, is directly applicable in all member states. It does not require transposition. It creates uniform law immediately. And this is important to remember because the EU Space Act, even if we call it Act, will be a regulation. That means that the rules will apply directly and identically across the Union. No national variations, no delayed implementation. So finally, what I would like to mention is because also we've been speaking, or people think that because the Commission already proposed the legislation that it entry into force. So I will explain a bit the legislative procedure, right? The Commission proposes, right, legislation, and then the European Parliament and the Council co-legislate in that sense, right? Adoption requires a majority in Parliament and a qualified majority voting in the Council, not unanimity. So once it is adopted, it becomes binding across the Union without national ratifications. So structurally, what we're seeing is a competence that was originally designed for coordination in space is now being used through internal market logic to create a harmonized and directly applicable regulatory framework. Also, if you have read through the initial draft that, as I said, it's been now discussed in Parliament and also like through the Space Working Party, etc., etc. The entry into force that was proposed or that was stipulated in the Act is only from 2030. So even if they all manage to agree today that this is what we want, the entry into force will be in 4 years from now. So now situating all of this within the European, the EU context. So the EU Space Act differs from both the US and ESA also approaches in one critical dimension, is that, as I was saying, it creates a harmonized internal market regulatory framework. Unlike ESA requirements, which apply contractually, and unlike US agency-based standards, the EU Space Act will be a regulation directly binding across member states. And I cannot emphasize this enough. So it would likely, and I say likely also because we don't know where exactly, there would be the main divergence points that they will change, but it will likely align licensing criteria, standardize supervision. It will also impose reporting and risk management obligations that are common to all of the EU parties. So this represents a move from policy statements to evidence-based compliance to legal accountability, right? And what I would like to do is to also synthesize the contrast between the US model or the current US model and what could potentially be the European model. So the US model, as I said, is agency-based, waiver-friendly, regulator fragmented, and debate about risk-based updates, while the European model is more centralizing via the internal market logic that I explained, increasing numerical stringency, moving towards regulatory harmonization, and more willing to embed prescriptive obligations. So neither system is fully mature. Both are evolving. But Europe at the moment appears to be more institutionally oriented towards structured legal integration. So to start concluding and leave time for the conclusions of Kantan, but also the Q&A, we are witnessing the transformation of debris mitigation from voluntarily technical best practices, to regulatory expectation, to enforceable obligations. The US is tightening the requirements, but through a decentralized and politically contested architecture. Europe is moving toward a harmonized regulatory model under the EU Space Act and also the Zero Debris Framework. And the success of either approach will depend on the technical feasibility, regulatory coherence, and international interoperability, which in the end is one of the most important aspects. So I started the presentation saying, that indeed we are going through in space debris mitigation through soft law to hard law, or more hardening of this law. So the era of purely soft law is ending. All of these debris mitigations, they've served as an initial consensus and now are evolving into fragmented in the world, yes, but hard law. And the question is not whether binding obligations will expand, but whether they will be implemented intelligently, proportionately, and also, which is in the end more important, globally aligned. So I will conclude my presentation here. I wanted to, I hope I managed to give this, basic perspective of what the EU Space Act is, and also how the US is doing at the moment. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Also, if you want to send me questions by mail, happy to have a discussion with you. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thank you very much for the presentation. I thought it was very clear. We'll now move on to the questions. So if you have any question, either on what Sibyl said or what Alberto presented, please write these questions in the Q&A section dedicated for that. You can also put comments and vote for the questions you think are most interested. So I see there are now 2 questions and a few comments. So let's start with Gerard Schalter. So the first question is, how does ESA envision the operational enforcement of zero debris compliance across multinational missions where jurisdiction, liability, and supervision are distributed? That's a complex question.
You want me to start with that one?
Please go on, Quentin.
So the first point I would like to comment on is about ESA envisioning some operational enforcement. That is, ESA has requirements applicable to its missions, and that's what Sibyl has shown. And therefore, I will give the floor to Sibyl just after. But that's the first point to understand. ESA is not a regulatory organization supposed to impose or enforce requirements on external actors unless they are part of an ESA procurement for an ESA mission. That is really the important aspect. Then for what concerns our missions, then there are various ways to check that they fit the requirements highlighted by Sibyl. And so this is the straightforward answer to that. Sibyl, do you want to say maybe a bit more about maybe in practice the functioning of the Independent Safety Office and how does that work?
Sure. Yeah, I can complement, but basically the short answer is what you said. We We are not a regulatory body, so we can only monitor how our technical requirements are applied across different missions. And I think that's a really good question because actually I've shown the diversity of different ESA missions and different contracts that we have. Sometimes ESA is fully responsible from the development until the operations phase, but it has occurred that ESA is only responsible, for example, for the development stages, and then operations are taken over by an external entity, or let's say even to another case where ESA is only responsible of a hosted payload within a larger platform that is owned by another entity. So in these cases, that's also why we have issued this implementation document that I briefly mentioned. So in this document, we also mention at which level of applicability the standard comes when you are in each phases of the mission, but also it tries to categorize the different missions that we see in ESA to define the applicability of this policy. So for example, ESA owned or ESA procured missions or hosted payloads. And then in these specific cases, in practice, what we do is that we tailor down the requirements to the specific hosted payload, for example, so that only the requirements applied by the part that is owned by ESA is considered. Usually when we have operations that are handled by an external entity, we make sure that our space segment and space system is prepared to embark all the requirements that we have, all the technical requirements, but then all the operational requirements and the compliance check on these operational requirements is more a best effort basis, and we can provide recommendations, but we cannot force the external entity to apply these requirements. So yeah, it's a complex topic. We're still defining also internally the best way to tailor these requirements, but there is already a preliminary way forward on these topics.
Thank you very much, Sibyl. Okay, let's move on to the second question of Gerard. Another technical question. So I think also same Sibyl, maybe we will be able to answer. What incident response or anomaly handling frameworks are being considered to ensure real-time compliance monitoring rather than post-mission verification?
So I think it goes a little bit with what we said before. ESA is not a regulatory body, so in the end, we can only monitor which requirements were flown down to the mission. But of course, now we also have introduced this Space Debris Mitigation Assessment Board. So in case there's an anomaly on board in a mission that is fully owned by ESA and under ESA responsibility, then the policy asks or requests the ESA representative or project manager to report these anomalies so that they can, at least the technical recommendations can be discussed with the agency. Now we don't monitor all the, let's say, external partners' compliance when the operations are not under ESA responsibility.
Okay, thank you very much. We will move on to a question from Jean-Claude Worms. He's asking about how the will be STM, so space traffic management, in lunar orbits managed by whom, how? It's a very complex question. Maybe Quentin or Cyril or even Alberto, you have an answer.
I mean, again, if I start with a bit of the semantics, so space traffic management is a complex term that means many different things. What is clear is that at the moment there is no such thing as a management of space traffic in the lunar or cislunar domain. However, we can already have considerations about how to behave with our missions in this domain, in terms of operation, in terms of post-mission disposal, etc. So I think, again, maybe Sibid, if you want to highlight a few things that we are doing at ESA, because as part of the requirement that you showed, there are considerations in that domain.
Exactly. Yeah, so we do have some initial requirements on that. As I said, it's really some seed requirements because we're not yet imposing the full extent of the space debris mitigation frameworks to lunar orbits. But yeah, as you said, we have requirements and recommendations on how to dispose from a lunar orbit, try to minimize the interference with future missions that will operate there. And related to your questions, there's also provisions to, so we ask for spacecraft to be, at least during their operational lifetime, as trackable as possible, if I can put it in this way. And also in the end of life, if a disposal is chosen that you will remain in lunar orbit, that the orbits are predictable as much as possible. So this all goes in the sense of we're trying to build also awareness of the population in lunar orbit. We are not there yet, but at least for now we are asking future missions to help in that way. And unfortunately, I don't know exactly on the specific topic of space traffic management for lunar orbits. That may be also more a question for our space debris office. But I know that there are several missions and projects within ESA for space-based traffic management and improving the trackability in general for lunar orbits. So that's ongoing.
So indeed, that's a point I wanted to add on the let's say on our ability to know what is happening in the cislunar domain, especially SSA capabilities around the moon are quite limited, for a simple reason, which is that when you're using telescopes from the ground, it's quite hard to follow objects that are too close to the moon because the moon is too bright. So you need to rely to improve your SST capabilities in cislunar domain. You need to rely on space-based capabilities. And as a matter of fact, as part of the successful package that was received by the Space Safety Program at the last ministerial, is a portion of the funding to develop the first phases of a mission called LUMOS that will be developing this space-based lunar monitoring of objects in the cislunar environment. So that is, I would say, not a framework for space traffic management with rules and etc. But at least we are building, let's say, technical building blocks that will allow us to operate a traffic monitoring system in the cislunar environment.
Okay, thank you very much for your answers. The next question is about whether the slides will be shared. Yes, the webinar is recorded and the recording plus the slides will be shared afterwards. Then we have a question from David Eagleson, perhaps for Alberto. How can a unified approach between ESA and the EU be ensured as policies develop? Which is a very complex question.
Yes, thank you for the question. I'm trying to reflect because it's really not that easy. I mean, we know the complicated governance that we have in Europe. So Europe is a very broad term. So in that sense, especially for space, we have ESA, but we have the EU, but we also have member states. So we see like different levels, of governance that overlap with each other. So in that sense, I think it will be more up to these member states to have a coherent vision, let's say, in all of those different governance. But as you know, for example, you have like member states from ESA that are not member states from the EU, and vice versa. So it's always a bit difficult, to have a unified approach between ESA and the EU. Having said that, I think also from the ESA team, Cantan, during this like zero debris, charter, let's say the way that you have facilitated this, and that you have like in a way led the discussion or enabled this discussion. You also did so, you know, in taking into account the EU. So maybe you have a more practical vision of the things that are being done, or how can these policies, you know, be a bit more unified. But as I said, and this is like what I would like to, you know, to emphasize, is that it's a complex governance system in Europe to have just like one unified approach.
Indeed, I think again, picking on words, what do we mean by unified approach? The fact is, if we think about, are we united in where we want to go in the coming years in terms of increased commitment to debris mitigation and remediation, to a safer space environment, to a cleaner space sector? This is pretty clear. There is a very good alignment between what the EU is promoting, funding, and planning to set up in terms of rules, and what ESA has been doing on the technical side of things. And this was expressed quite clearly by the ESA Director General at the European Space Conference, where he said that the EU Space Act is a positive thing for Europe. Now the question is, how do we build on the heritage in the space sector, the various requirements, technologies developed at ESA, in the ECSS, with the industry, to make sure that we are moving forward with ambition, but not at the detriment of the industry, to make sure that all the developments that will be taken in will allow the industry to improve its practices without basically being hurt by additional requirements. And so this is key, and this requires indeed that practices that we would set up at ESA level, things that we have been developing, are aligned with future requirements at EU levels, because it's obvious that the industry will not be able, depending on who is the one procuring the object, to follow completely different sets of practices and of standards. And so indeed, we are working closely with the EU to make sure that we converge towards a unified system, unified sets of requirements for everyone in Europe.
Okay, thank you very much. We are running a bit out of time, and there are a few questions left.
Maybe one or two more.
So yes, perhaps one or two more. First, Scarlett O'Donnell, so she thanks you, Sibylle and Alberto, for the presentations. And to Alberto, she asks you, how do you foresee the evolution of EU SST in relation to the EU Space Act? Will harmonization of SST become part of the EU regulation through the Space Act regulation? And yeah.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot, and great to see that you're here too, Scarlett. Thanks for the question. So I don't think the relationship between USST and the Space Act is going to become much tighter over time. So far, USST has developed as a cooperation framework, right, and also voluntary, quite member state, and also focus on service provision, right? So like tracking, collision avoidance, re-entry analysis, etc. So it has been more about coordination than harmonization. Now the Space Act changes a bit the landscape, as we were saying, and once you introduce binding obligations on operators, so for example on debris mitigation, on collision avoidance, you inevitably need also this like common technical backbone. So I think that the backbone is SST. So I would expect the Space Act to gradually also formalize the role of USST as an enabler, if that makes sense. And what will this mean for harmonization? So will this mean like full harmonization? So probably not immediately. I think that space surveillance still touches on security sensitivities and national capabilities, but I can see a progressive integration on like common standards, shared data protocols, possibly even clear level of mechanisms linked to compliance, as also Kantan was mentioning under the Space Act. So in short, I do not foresee USSD being absorbed into the Space Act, but I do see it becoming structurally embedded in it, you know, if that makes sense. Thanks. And also, sorry, just to say that if there are questions and people want to approach me via email or privately through LinkedIn, you know, I'm happy to keep the discussion, to keep answering these questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Alberto, for answering this last question. We are really running out of time, so sorry for the other questions that have been asked. Thank you everyone for asking all of these questions. We will now move on to the wrap-up and the conclusion.
Yes, so mindful of time, I will be very brief. First, I want to thank Sibyl and Alberto for taking the time to deliver these presentations and prepare a very interesting set of slides that indeed will be shared. And there is a lot of data and information on them, so it will be nice to have them as a reference to check later. I also want to thank the attendees. We have quite a big turnout. We stabilized at a bit more than 70 participants. What I want to 2 points I want to make in closing. First, we have quite a lot of things planned for the community in the coming year. Maybe to focus on the parts in orange are those directly related to the zero debris community. So we'll have in April, at a date that will be announced soon, the first zero debris technical webinar that will really focus on the efforts related to the technical booklet, the coordination at that level, how to participate, what would be the next, let's say, issues of the booklet, revisions, etc. The Clean Space Days, that is one of the big events of the space safety program for what concerns eco-design, zero debris, and in-orbit servicing, that will also have sessions dedicated to the zero debris community. And finally, in September, from the 8th to the 11th of September, the first Zero Debris Week, non-organized by ESA, but organized by one of our main community partners, that is the Spanish Space Agency. So it will be, Sevilla in September is probably one of the best places on Earth. So I encourage all of you to already block this week to join us there. In addition to this, I would say, pure zero debris event, you can see that we have webinars on re-entry modeling, webinars about the drama tool, and especially one event on responsible lunar exploration. So connecting to one question earlier, for those of you who are interested, so this enabling sustainable and responsible lunar exploration to be held in June at EXAT, so the ESA Center in Harwell in the United Kingdom. So please continue to follow our various social networks, and you will have all the information on the exact date and registration process for all these events. And finally, my last sentence will be again to let's say continue this call for volunteers. The zero debris community is something that is started out of a small group of organizations that co-drafted the Zero Debris Charter, but now we have more than 200 members. You are all eminent members of this community, and it is important that for the community to be active and sustainable in the long term, everyone tries to participate in organizing events, webinars, working groups. So again, the booklet is a very successful, visible part of what the community does, but there is a lot to be done on the policy side of things, community reflections, regulatory, how to better support innovation, commercialization. I know these are strong interests in the community, so if you're willing to give more to the community, to take the lead in one of these activities, really do not hesitate. This is not the ESA Zero Debris Charter or Zero Debris Community. This is simply the Zero Debris Community. We are all part of this. And so anyone who wants to step up and organize something is welcome. And of course, we will be here to give support and guidance. So if you have any question, please contact us at the email that notified you of the link of this webinar. And we'll be happy to again help you set up your own initiative and connect with other interested members of the community. Thank you very much and have a nice rest of the day.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Bill, Alberto, Quentin, and all the attendees. Have a very good day.
And Sasha for organizing it.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.